Welcome, my friends, to Life Interrupts Us. It's my podcast. It's new. This is season one, and we're excited about it. This season, we're focusing on relationships and all aspects of it. We're going to talk about dating. We're going to talk about friendship. We're going to talk about sex. We're going to talk about romance. We're going to talk about having low standards and lofty expectations. We're going to talk about fathers, parents, children. We're going to try to cover everything that speaks to the realm of relationships. But here's how we're going to do it. We're going to do it with style. We're going to do it with my style. My style, I'm glad you asked. I'm a storyteller. Yes, in other realms of my life, I'm a singer, songwriter, producer, author, all that good stuff. But in this particular realm, I'm a storyteller. And boy, do I have stories to tell. Some of them will make you laugh. Some of them, they'll be tough to hear. Some of them come with lessons that I've learned that maybe you can learn. Some of them, I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm going to keep it real on this podcast so that you can know that I'm authentic, that I'm not playing around with just being another guy with another podcast, rambling on. Nah, I got some real stuff to say. I have some real lived experiences, some of them exciting, some of them devastating. But all of them are centered around this one fact. Life interrupts us all. I just decided I want to start talking about it. I want to start talking about some of the interruptions that I've had. And I've had a lot. So this season, as we focus on relationships, you'll hear me talk quite a bit about the interruptions that I've had. Things that didn't go right. Some things that did. Either way, just keep tuning in. Buckle up. Because Stephen Wayne is going to keep it all the way real. So, let's get ready to overcome the interruptions. Hey fam, welcome to another episode of Life Interrupts Us, the podcast. I'm Stephen Wayne, your storyteller, and today I have the most distinguished pleasure of having the most perfect guest that I could have on my podcast. This is season one, and season one, we're focusing on relationships. So, who better than to be here than my mama, Dr. Gloria, or Dr. G, or just Globo? Mom, it's so good to have you here. Thank you for coming to hang out with us and talk this talk that we talk. Um, can you let me do this? Let me do this right. First of all, she is a psychologist, clinical psychologist, a licensed psychologist, not one of them honorary doctorate people. Nothing wrong with that, but that's not a real PhD. She actually went to school and got her education. She is a bigwig in the world of political and emotional commentary. She's been on everything from CNN to NBC. She even been on that other network that we will not mention. She and she's written books and plays and working on a movie and I'm gonna let her tell you a little bit more about herself. But more than any of that, she's my mom, and I'm her only child. So you know she's special because I'm special in every way. So mom, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored, because I know that there could be many people that you have for your show, but I'm grateful to be here.
Mom, tell us a little bit about um, tell us a little bit about why you decided to come on my podcast.
Well, not only are you my son, and it
Yes.
would have been very difficult to refuse you, but I think this topic is really, really important. I think relationships are critical for our mental, physical, and spiritual health. And if we can do anything whatsoever to improve upon those relationships, it's really important. So you've taken this journey to write some pretty provocative books about relationships with your own
Yeah,
and
I write
life.
too.
Yeah. And I just think it's really appropriate for us to have this conversation now.
That's good. Speaking of which, so again, season one is all about relationships, but every facet of relationships. And in keeping with that theme, I mentioned this probably in another podcast that I was reading. Um, I was reading a book, pretty good book too, local author, and in one of the segments of the book, she said, um, "Yes, I think this character is suffering from generational mistakes." And I had to pause. I reread that. I read it again. I was like, "Wow." So then I wrote it down. I was like, because you and I come from the church background. We come from the Christian, Judeo-Christian background. I don't necessarily subscribe to the Western Christian theology because that's some other stuff. But I love God. I love Jesus. You
Mm-hmm.
know that, and I know you do too.
Yes.
But in that context, um, for generations, no pun intended, we've been told people suffer from generational curses.
Mm-hmm.
And I have always struggled with that teaching because without unpacking it here, because this isn't a theological conversation,
Mm-hmm.
I don't agree with all of the tenets that have been assigned to it. However, when the author said generational mistakes, it made me think about my own life. So, this particular episode, we're looking at generational mistakes versus generational curses, and not trying to see which one is more appropriate to assign to situations, but just looking at it from a different perspective on how not only are there some things that are passed down, but that we really can do something about it because generational curses has such a strong spiritual connotation on it that suggests you may not be able to get from underneath that thing
Mm-hmm.
because curse seems to be invoked from some greater power.
Mm-hmm.
And then you start asking questions, well, is God cursing us? Or is, I watched this debate. This dude, an apologist, and he goes around the campuses talking about Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
and he'll take on any question and debate anybody. And he was talking with someone about whether or not Jesus is the only way. And one of the professor came. I can't. It was some school in Florida, I believe. May have been Florida International, FIU, and one of the professors came down and was arguing with him, debating with him about all that he was saying. And I just watched and said, you can't. There's no time to explain all that in this one conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the guy did a masterful job of addressing questions that were thrown at him, not just from the professor, but from other people as well. But that's not what I want to cover here. But the whole concept of generational curses, it's really a strong connotation. So, in reading the book I was reading, it made me think about my own life. Now, for those of you watching this episode, if you've never watched another episode of Life Interrupts Us, this is what you need to know. I keep it 100% real on this podcast, and I tell stories because number one, I'm good at it, and two, I enjoy telling stories. I think stories have some tremendous and anecdotes for life crisis and life decisions and that kind of thing. So, Mom, let me tell you a story that connects to generational mistakes versus generational curses. So, here's what you need to know, and I'll give you the short version because my mama was there, so I don't need to tell her the story necessarily, but remind her of it. I did not grow up with my father. I've mentioned that on a few different episodes because it has been, to some extent, a recurring theme in my life. Um, but there were things that I was told by my mama growing up not too many, because she certainly, one thing my mom didn't do, she never demonized my father. He had done a good job of that all on his own. She did not do that. She never ever um, gave him other names or talked down about him. She was no, there was no disparaging comments. But there was a time I was about 16. We're at the house, and my mom is in the dining room. I'm in the living room, and those rooms were right next to each other. And I'm on the phone, and I'm talking to a girl that I used to date. And the girl called me. I won't even get off into her name, but she called me and she asked me. This was funny even thinking about it right now. She asked me because she was dating some dude, but she still liked me. But she asked me if I would teach her the art of making love.
Oh boy.
And actually, I wasn't 16; I was 17.
Hmm.
And so I laughed. You didn't know what was going on. So I said, can you hold on a second? And she said, yeah. And that was back in the day when we had those handheld phones, wireless, and so you could push a mute button on it. So I pushed mute on it, and I said, Mama, you said what? You were doing something at the kitchen counter in the dining room. I said, oh, this girl's on the phone, and she called me and asked me if I could teach her the art of making love. Oh my God.
Ooh.
And it was the most hilarious thing to me in that moment,
Mhm.
but not to you.
Mhm.
And your face changed, and you looked me dead in the face, and you said something that I will never ever forget. You said, "Don't be a womanizer like your father."
Mhm.
And I was like, "Hey, all right, so let me call you back." And I got off the phone because it wasn't like I was going to tell her right then. Yeah, I'll hook you up. I wanted to hook her up. I did, but I was so messed up when you said that because it flooded me with my own flaws, and it made me think about any of the other things that I did that weren't right, and wondering if those were things that my father did. And then thinking, I've been around that man 2 days my whole entire life, and those 2 days weren't even a full 48 hours. How could I possibly be like him? So um, that was doing the math. That was literally 40 years ago, or 39 years ago. Um, I don't know if you remember that moment. Um, I also remember you told me at 15, son, you need to get a job. What you didn't say was your father was lazy.
Mhm.
You need to get a job and don't be like him. I'm not gonna have you sitting around the house. You didn't say any of that. You just said, son, you need to get a job. But I felt once once that other thing happened later, because that was 2 years later, it made me think about when you said, son, you need to get a job. And I wonder if she was thinking, you need to get a job. Don't be like your father.
Mhm.
Because it was a tone. You weren't mean or admonishing. You just said, son, you need to get a job. So, what I want to do is unpack, if we can go back in time
Mhm.
and unpack that as it pertains to generational mistakes.
Mhm.
So as I'm thinking about looking back in time, I'm wondering now, did I suffer from generational curses or generational mistakes?
Mhm.
And are those two inextricably tied
Mhm.
together, or are they different from one another? Because
Mhm.
when I hear the word mistake, I think a mistake can be altered.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so what's your thoughts on that as we look back and then bring it forward?
Well, that's such a great, great concept. So, I, like you, I don't want to get into the religious connotations as it relates to
Sure.
generational curses. But what I do believe is that if we continue to make generational mistakes based on what we know or don't know about our parents or grandparents, they can lead to generational curses unless we do something about it. So I think I want to say it that way.
Okay.
And as it relates to what I was thinking at that time, it wasn't so much about you being a part of a generational mistake. It was, I want to prevent him from making those same mistakes. I wasn't even thinking about it generationally. I was just thinking as a young man, and also because I was a young mother trying to raise a
Yeah.
young man. I wanted to make sure that I was addressing things that I heard and saw that could be helpful to you in becoming a great man.
Okay. Okay. So, but here's my question. Some of the things, probably not all of them, but some of the things that you addressed in your raising me, is it fair to say that there were things that reminded you of my father?
I would say that there were things that I have to be honest here. I
Yeah,
really
keep it
didn't
real.
I really did not factor him
Hmm.
in
Well, that day you must have because you said it
yeah,
that day.
but most of the time I never really factored him in
Okay.
because for my own sanity and emotional health, I tried not to think about him or
That
to
nigga is something, or
yeah
was something.
or relate him to you in any way,
Yeah.
you know.
Okay.
But I will say instinctively, you know, because that had been the man I had experience with other than daddy.
Mm-hmm.
I knew what my dad was, a righteous man,
Yeah.
but I
He's a
also
good
knew
man.
what this other one was.
Yeah.
So there were things that I felt like, well, you know, he's got to get some of this from somewhere because the man that he's living with, which was my dad,
Right.
he's not that guy,
Right.
but this person is still his dad, regardless to whether he's in the room or not.
Okay. So then, in light of that, you're the professional.
Hmm.
You're the the head and heart doctor. So if there is, what is the science behind the fact that I have traits? Because now, as a fully grown man with adult children myself, there have been plenty of times in my adult life that you have said, "Ooh, your father used to do that."
No.
As we progress in our communication about him.
Hmm.
So how is it then that I have done things or been a certain way that's like him,
Hmm.
not but yet not ever being around him
Yeah.
in that way. And by the way, before you answer that, when you said to me that day you need to get a job, I if you don't remember, I do. Domino's Pizza was my second job actually.
Hmm.
With my first job, I was working at the movie theater because I wasn't old enough to drive yet, although I had already been driving. But I had no problem going to work,
Hmm.
and here's why. My father, the one experience that I had with him,
Hmm.
I saw a grown man who had several children and was working at Stop and Go, which is the equivalent of Circle K. I saw that at 13 years old. So that was just 2 years before you said you need to get a job.
Hmm.
So that was fresh on my mind to the point where I was like, I was unimpressed with that thought.
Hmm.
I was like, I, I got friends that work at Stop and Go. Why is this grown man working at Stop and Go and then hardly ever going to work? It's like, and you never told me at that time that he was lazy. And again, this podcast is not to disparage the memory
Hmm.
of my father because he's gone, but this is the truth.
Hmm.
He was a lazy man,
Hmm.
and so when you said you need to get a job, it was nothing for me to go absolutely instead of going, oh, what do I got to get a job for? No, because it triggered a thought. I don't want to be associated with how he got down
Hmm.
at a very early age. It was a very negative experience for me. So, like you say, you're protecting your own mental health. I
Hmm.
was protecting mine. But, oh, absolutely. You said, Mama, you said I need to get a job? Facts. I'll go get one right now.
Hmm.
And I did.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
but back to that part about how does the connection happen?
Yeah.
And because here's the part that makes me think it is a curse
Hmm.
is the fact that you could not be around somebody
Hmm.
and still be like them.
Yeah.
How, what? How? Reconcile that for me.
Yeah, well, it's back to the nature nurture controversy. So, the controversy with nature nurture, how much does our DNA or our roots, play into who we are and who we become versus how much does our environment dictate that? And it's a combination. So, every single one of us have picked up traits, whether we wanted them or not,
Mm-hmm.
from our parents or sometimes even our grandparents. We do things because it's not just bad things. There are some good things. The fact that you're musical, the fact that you used to love to dance, that was your dad.
Mm-hmm.
That was what he enjoyed doing. And
Well,
playing
so did you,
games.
and
Uh-huh.
you musical, and you
But you
love to
got
dance. Yeah.
but you got that from both of
Okay.
us. You got but then there are other things about you and your personality. How you are a no nonsense kind of person and this kind of stuff.
I ain't got time for the bullshit though.
No, but that's a lot like he was.
Okay. Even though
And
he was full of bullshit
yeah, he
though.
was full of it, but he still had that personality type like you did. So again, you're going to get the good, bad, and the ugly
Mm-hmm.
just genetically. It's like a blueprint that passes on.
Okay.
So you can't escape it.
Okay. So, if a person then is an alcoholic,
Hmm.
does that mean that genetically their offspring can be predisposed to being an alcoholic?
Absolutely. You can be at risk. It is a risk factor when a mother or father is using drugs or alcohol. It's the same thing, with drugs or any addictions. It
Mm-hmm.
has to do a lot with that nature nurture. It's a combination. It's not all nature, not all nurture, but it can happen.
So then that means that people who go to a sperm bank to
Hmm.
get sperm for to have a child,
Hmm.
um, no matter what they do with their nurture,
Hmm.
the nature is going to be there.
It's a possibility. Yeah,
That's
it's a
crazy.
possibility.
And it's crazy because when you introduce again the concept of generational curses,
Hmm.
it's like, well then, and there's no way of really unpacking that without getting theological, but from the perspective of what's passed down,
Hmm.
um, like you said, if music is passed down,
Hmm.
then was that the generational blessing?
Hmm.
Because that's the opposite of a generational curse.
Hmm.
But from the conversation, for the conversation of generational mistakes,
Hmm.
it just when I read it in that book, it gave me hope
Hmm.
that okay, a mistake more times than not can either be undone
Hmm.
or turned around
Yeah.
or
Hmm.
not made again
Yeah.
versus a curse. You got to go to something or someone so they can lift the curse.
Right. But see, I also think of it this way. When I think about generational mistakes, a generational mistake can be like, for example, my dad had to make ends meet, and he had to be creative in that because he didn't have formal education.
Right.
But he also didn't save money. He also did not prepare for the future. He lived for today.
Real
So,
good.
yeah, so if he had a good job and he did real good, then we live real good. And then if he didn't, we didn't. But it's not a generational curse that some of us may have picked that up where we spend
Mm.
more money. It was a mistake. We just didn't understand
Right.
where this could get us. We saw daddy do it. It made us less rigid, about losing stuff or losing a house. And,
Yeah. Yeah.
we kind of say, okay, that's what happens. That's what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. So keeping it in the same framework of conversation that we're having about dad and
Hmm.
about economics, I remember hearing him talk about how at 10 years old, I believe he was in the third grade, he
Hmm.
had to drop out of school
Hmm.
to take care of his family.
Yep.
And he wasn't even the oldest of all of the many siblings that he had.
Mm-mm.
And that his dad, he was there when his dad experienced a tragedy
Mm-hmm.
that ended up taking his life. Um, and I'm imagining when you're a 10-year old, your job, no matter what generation, no matter what time line you're in, I don't care if it's the 30s or the 20s or the
Mm-hmm.
1800s, kids played.
Yeah.
Kids were kids. Now I know that in rural areas, kids had to do more.
Mm-hmm.
They had more responsibilities. They had more expectation on them. They had to
Mm-hmm.
grow up faster. I get that, but I can only imagine being 10 years old and
Mm-hmm.
having to start driving tractors or wagons and tractors or whatever he was
Mm-hmm.
driving and taking care of the family and hustling. It gave him a sense of life is fleeting,
Mm-hmm.
which it is, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
It is. You got people who will live their whole life saving all their money, not doing nothing with it, and then they die, and the money go to somebody else, and they didn't
Mm-hmm.
enjoy one day on this earth.
Mm-hmm.
And because I remember Dad being a really dope dresser,
Mm-hmm.
always having the baddest car on the block, and the nicest jewelry. I got one of those diamond rings that he
Mm-hmm.
had, and then having to move a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm wondering if those childhood experiences at 10 and 9 and when he had to become more than a 10-year-old was supposed to become
Mm-hmm.
shaped how he looked at life.
Mm-hmm.
Saying, I don't need saving money. I need to live. And he lived in a different time culturally and racially
Yeah.
in the South.
Right.
So what are your thoughts?
Well, he didn't have all of the same opportunities. So not only did he have to become a man at 10 years old when
Yeah.
his dad had that accident and
Mm-hmm.
he observed it, he became Mama's little man.
Mm.
And after becoming Mama's little man, we often think of Daddy as this, really serious, God fearing guy. But Dad started using alcohol as a way to cope with all of that. And so he really became an alcoholic.
Oh,
And
I didn't know that.
he became an alcoholic, and Daddy had this fun side to himself. He loved to dance. He gambled.
I know about the
He
gambling.
smoked.
Oh, he
He
smoked.
was a dapper guy.
That nigga was clean.
Yeah, he was. But he used that alcohol to kind of mediate against all of that responsibility he had on him
Mm.
because he basically had to take care of the family. So not only that, but then like you said, culturally, he was in a time where what kind of work were you going to do unless you worked in the field? So Daddy hustled.
Yeah,
He
glad
said,
you
I'm
said he
not
worked
doing
in
that.
the
He said, I'm
field.
not doing that. So Daddy became this gambler and this hustler. And that's what makes his story so powerful because his exchange with Christ really transformed his life. So that's why that generational curse argument um, it doesn't really live out for him because Daddy accepted Christ, changed his life totally,
Yeah.
and then lived his best life, but he still hadn't learned the skills of how to manage your money or how to stay with something. Because my dad and your grandfather, when he wanted to do something, he quit a job because they told him he couldn't go to a funeral of
Yeah,
somebody he didn't
yeah.
even know.
That's right.
He didn't even know that man. And he was working for the city. He had a good job.
Yeah, a
And
job ain't nothing but
I
work.
remember Mama saying, "Your daddy has lost his mind because they said you cannot go, you can't take off." He was working. You would see Dad on the street. You know how men are doing the blacktop and stuff, which, by the way, he self taught himself.
Mm-hmm.
He was brilliant.
Yeah, he was.
But if you don't get those building blocks and know how to save money and know how to do things appropriately for the future, you you can't do it. And that's partly a generational mistake.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, I see that. I would have a hard time with someone telling me, well, that's because it was a curse.
Oh,
All right. Well, what aspect of it would have been a curse? But a mistake I can see
yeah.
because some mistakes we make are because we just don't
We're
know.
just ignorant.
Yeah, we,
Yeah.
we are. We don't
Yeah.
know. and so we do what we think we're supposed to do. And I mean, for many many years, heck, for decades, I never saved any money.
Mm-hmm.
I never
Me either.
focused much on credit.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
You didn't know.
I didn't know.
And so
Yeah.
by the time we found out, it was like, okay. But what I was able to do was go, okay, I can tell my kids, hey, start these accounts.
Right.
Hey, make sure that you only get 1 to 2 credit cards.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, make sure that you keep a job
Mm-hmm.
so that you can manage your life.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
But see, that's the whole difference between what we've heard of as a curse versus a mistake, because you get to fix a mistake. You get to correct it. Because, the whole concept of a curse, is woo,
well, and it was put on you by
it's by
something or
something.
someone. They
They
have to
have to
be the one to
remove it.
lift it. It's
Yes.
like, all right, well,
Yes.
then God, can you please lift this curse off me? Because
Right.
I don't want to eat cheeseburgers
Yes.
no more.
Yes. Or you can say, the reason I'm right here is because maybe this is all I knew to do
Mm-hmm.
because of my past generations,
Right.
but I don't want to do that anymore. And that's what you've done. That's what I've done. That's what others have done to say, we don't have to keep doing that anymore. We have better, we can do better. We
Yeah.
know better.
Yeah. Um, so in light of that's really masterful. I have to ask, do you feel like now this is again, I'm a storyteller. I tell stories on this
Mm-hmm.
podcast, but I also give my guests opportunities to tell stories as well.
Mm-hmm.
We ain't in no rush. We ain't got nowhere to be. Do you have a thing in your life that you believe is, not was, but is a generational mistake? And if so, what are you doing about it?
I think that the biggest thing that I ever had that I felt was a generational mistake, because I've made so many other corrections. So, not going to school. I've gone to school,
Yeah.
trying to make better choices with people that I'm with. I feel like, even though I had really great examples with that with mom and dad, but I still made some mistakes in that area. But I think the biggest thing that I am continuing to work on, and I'm so much better, and that is with the economic situation,
Hmm.
to make sure I'm saving money and putting money aside. And, because when I want to do something, I want it. And when I want
You gonna
something,
buy it.
I
You gonna
want
go
it,
to it
I
just
will
like your
get
daddy,
it,
just like your daddy.
just like my
Shit, just
daddy.
like her daddy.
I am. And I would do that. But now that I'm older, I realize I just can't do it. One of my biggest things actually is giving to other people.
Mm-hmm.
It's really not even all about me. I did buy myself some red bottom shoes. And I did buy myself a St. John suit. I did.
That's the devil's work. Listen, anybody that take a pair of regular shoes and paint a color on the bottom of them and raise the price by $400 is out of their damn mind.
But I have basically, if I look back at what I've used for money, it's been giving it to other people. They never knew that sometimes I would be on the edge, but I just believed in the principle. Now, that was a generational mistake, but also a generational blessing, because I watched my daddy do that. I watched
Take in
him,
strays and
yes, I watched him be a giver. But I'd also watch the cupboard be filled up because he was a giver, because he would help people. So while it is a blessing, it can be a mistake to not make sure you have what you need so that you can take care of what you need. Because at the end of the day, most times the people that you've helped, they can't help you.
yeah.
So you kind of on your own. But just being more mindful of your spending and what you do, because I spent a lot of money as
Yeah.
an older adult. But
Well,
God,
you can't take it with you.
no, I can't take it with me, and God keeps blessing me to have it. So, but making sure that I'm always where I can do what I need to do, but always so I can be a giver.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's
that's
cool. That's really cool. Um, so Dr. Gloria unpacks generational mistakes and generational curses so well um, that I'm going to take the liberty here, creative liberty, and digress into another topic that has nothing to do with generational anything, has everything to do with how a parent protects their children. We're going to talk about that in just a second. So, if for some weird reason you have just tuned in to this particular podcast episode of Life Interrupts Us, you have now seen that I am sitting here with my mom, Dr. Gloria. She is world renowned. She has traveled the world. She has lectured all over the country and out of the country in South Africa and everywhere else. She's a college professor. She's owned her own clinical psychology practice or counseling service. She does a lot of work with diversity, equity, and inclusion across the country. She's highly sought after for those things. But today we've been talking about the concept of generational mistakes versus generational curses. And if you just jumped on, then you'll have to rewind it and check out the meat of that conversation. However, I, being Stephen Wayne, the storyteller and owner of this podcast, I have decided I wanted to turn a corner and digress into a different subject that, as I think about it, it may tie into generational curses to some extent. So I'm going to set the stage. I'm going to tell a little bit of the story, and then you can jump in with it. So I said earlier in the episode that I only spent a couple of days with my father my entire life. I'm 56. And those couple of days were during a trip to San Bernardino when I was 12 or 13. And he had gotten in touch with us some kind of way, which was always interesting to me, that he always found a way to get in touch with us, yet he never got in touch with us, especially me. So that's another thing. And I've worked through that, so I'm okay, but it's still an interesting fact. So the story goes that you took me to San Bernardino. I could tell in your body language and in your tone that you really didn't want to do it. I was supposed to spend a couple of weeks there, and I had never been away from you for more than 2 days. And so you took me, and it seemed like, because at the time we lived in Long Beach, and I swear, San Bernardino felt like we was driving to another state. It was like, how much longer is it going to take to get to? I had taken like 2 different naps and woke up and was like, we're not there yet. Now what I know is Rialto and Colton, we're driving through it, and you could see trees lined up. And I was like, man, this is far. So we get there, you connect with him, you drop me off at Gloria, my grandmother's house. Oddly enough, isn't it odd that my mama's name is Gloria, my grandmother's name was Gloria, my son's grandmother's, both of his grandmother's names are Gloria.
Yeah.
And one of his great grandmothers, which was my grandmother, name is Gloria. That's crazy. A lot of Glorias. Gloria. No. So you dropped me off, and I'm not gonna tell the whole story. I'm gonna compress it. But you drop me off. It becomes a wonderfully horrible experience. And 4 days later, I'm calling you, saying, you called me and you say, hey, how's it going? And I said, can you come and get me? I'm ready to go. And that was something that I carried for many, many, many years, because it was the thing that I was looking forward to. I have another episode called Low Standards versus Lofty Expectations. I had such a lofty expectation about what I was going to experience with him, and meeting other siblings and meeting my grandmother and all this stuff, because I hadn't seen him since I was a baby. So I had never in my own mind and heart demonized him. So I hadn't held him hostage. I had not been mad at him because he wasn't there. I never, like you, said, "You never really thought about." I never thought about him,
Mhm.
but when he said, "Hey, I want to spend some time with you," my heart was like, "Oh my God!" And my God, you're talking about deflating. That was the most, in all of the things I've done, that was up there in the top three of deflation
Mhm.
because the whole experience was so bad. Even I talked about this in another episode where for decades I hated horses because during that trip he took me horseback riding. The whole trip lasted about 45 minutes. I rode a horse for about 20 minutes. Took me 10 minutes. Took us 10 minutes to get there, and 10 minutes or so to get back. And it left a stain. Like every time I would see horses, it would remind me of the whole event. Now I didn't care that it was 20 minutes. I cared that the whole 4 days that was supposed to be 2 weeks was ended abruptly because he disappeared. He wasn't there. I was in his hometown. I was at his mama's house, and he was never around. I spent more time with my uncle, who's actually younger than me, who I have since found out biologically is not my uncle. He was adopted, and that's a whole other story. I have to get him on here to talk about that because he goes into depth about that. Um, but that was the extent of it. And I was like, so when I would see horses, I would instantly be triggered.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until Mika asked me, what's up with you and the horses thing?" And I had to deal with it because I never ever liked talking about it.
Mhm.
So I would just say, "I don't like horses."
Mhm.
And people can say they don't like all kind of stuff. They don't usually have to explain it.
Mhm.
So when I bring this up because I've been longing to have this conversation with you. We've talked about it before,
Mhm.
but this conversation with you from this perspective in this space, where other people can hear a mother's heart, hear a psychologist's mind,
Mhm.
and glean some anecdotes from this story. Because when you called, you could I know that you know me, and you could hear it in my voice. And I said, "Come get me," and I swear it wasn't 30 minutes later, and you was there.
Mhm.
And what seemed to take forever to get to San Bernardino took you minutes. And I want to know because at that time I never asked you,
Mhm.
and I know I'm taking you back in time with some of this podcast and ask, hoping that you can remember some things about those times. But I never asked you, um, why didn't you make me stay?
Mhm.
So as a father now, and I'm aiming to protect my kids from everything that I can,
Mhm.
even the two that are adults.
Mhm.
I'm giving them information and I'm telling them things that I know can help them go in a different direction than the directions that they're headed in.
Mhm.
Why didn't you say, "No, you need to man up, you need to spend some time with him, you need to stay"?
No. You said it. I needed to protect my son. That was my number one priority. Number two, I knew your dad. So it wasn't like I didn't know that something could go down. I was hoping it wouldn't. I was hoping that this could be, a moment that could start you all having a relationship together because I knew you needed it. You needed that. Children need both parents in their lives, and if they're not together, they need to have the freedom to be with the other parent with the other parent's blessings. But you're not going to damage my kid. And I wasn't worried about anything physical happening to you. I was wondering and worried about something emotional happening to you.
Well, it happened.
Yeah. So that was my biggest fear. So that's why whatever could go smoking to come and get you, I was around the corner to get you because that was my biggest concern. I didn't want to be the mother that tried to stand in the way of you having a relationship with him.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I never talked bad about you. And I just want to say to
About him, you
about
didn't.
no, right.
You
I
didn't
didn't
talk bad
no,
about me
I didn't
plenty of
I
times. You
didn't
can call me all kind of
no, no,
names.
no, no, no. But I did not want to say anything bad about him because I did not want to influence your relationship with
Mm-hmm.
him. I always believe this. If a parent is not right, he or she is going to show up for that child. They're going to find it out on their own. And then you would look at me side eyed or be mad at me because I tried to keep you from him.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to be that person. So I never told you all I knew about him. I just didn't know. I didn't believe that he would damage you in any way. I didn't, in terms of physically or sexually or
Yeah.
anything like that. I didn't think you'd be in harm's way in
Well,
that.
you'd have to have been there to do
And
that.
I knew right, and I knew his mother. I
She was
had
sweet.
I had met his mother, so I knew that that would be in place. So I said, God, let this be good for him. And it wasn't
It wasn't. It
because
wasn't.
he was who he was, and he was, Maya Angelou says it perfectly.
Yeah.
Somebody tells you who they are, believe them, and that's what he had done. But I didn't want to impose that on you.
Yeah. And it's funny because as much as I wish that I hadn't even gone, there there are some things that going did to ignite some things that I would end up having to deal with later.
Mhm.
They were there already,
Mhm.
and I didn't really know it, but that was the beginning of me um, starting to understand that I had an anger problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was like, wow, okay, but I didn't unpack it then.
Yeah. Well, you notice we never talked about it again.
Yeah, no, yeah, yeah. We never talked about it.
We
You, we,
we went back to our life.
right. We didn't ride home
Yeah.
talking about it.
No.
I mean,
No.
I told you I told you about it. I told you the story and
Yeah.
what he did and dropping me off at one of the other baby mama house unexpected, by the way,
Mhm. Yeah.
because she was looking at me like, who is this and why are you at my door?
Mhm.
Which was a whole other thing. But after that journey home, we never ever talked about it again until I would be an adult and just bring it up
Mhm.
randomly, and only just in small portions of it for whatever reason we were covering that subject. But it was polarizing,
Mhm.
and it seared me with a thought, but it seared a way of thinking
Mhm.
in me, that I have carried over. So again, this might have circled us full circle with generational mistakes
Mhm.
that I carried over in almost every relationship that
Mhm.
I've had, with
Mhm.
friends, with lovers, with whatever.
Mhm.
And that's, I don't want you to feel abandoned.
Mhm.
I don't. I want to make sure that I'm there for you.
Mhm.
And so even now, obviously we've talked about a live thing that I put up not too long ago, and venting and talking about friends and people coming and going in your life, and not being real.
Mhm.
Um, I've also within that had to look at me once more.
Mhm.
Um, what are you doing to contribute to some of these unbalanced relationships? And I come from an unbalanced relationship.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that honestly feels more like a curse than a mistake.
Yeah.
But I get that I'm still in control
You
and
get to change that.
can right the
Yeah.
ship,
Mhm.
with looking at why I'm
Mhm.
like that. Why do I invest so much into so many people?
Mhm.
Um, and sometimes not knowing that the ground is bad,
Mhm.
but other times knowing
Right.
that the ground is bad.
Yeah. But see, but I also, from that experience, and as you bring it up, I see it as vividly as if we were driving up to that house.
Man, that was
It's amazing, but it also shifted things in me because then I made the resolve he'll never hurt again. And even when there might have been times I should have said no or do something else or whatever, I know I became overindulging to try to protect your emotional health because I was so impacted by that, and I was feeling guilty that I even let you go.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine that.
I never said anything about it. We never talked about it.
Right.
But I hated that I even let you go, although you had to
I had
go.
to go.
You
I
had to
had to
go.
go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had to go. And you know what's interesting. So um, to get spiritual for a moment, my father was dying, and I just felt the Lord saying, "You need to go see him."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "Eh, whatever. I'm going back to doing what I'm doing." And again, weeks later, you need to go see him. So I told Mika, I said, Mika, I think the Lord has been impressing upon me that I need to go and see my father. Now, in the space between driving to San Bernardino as a 13-year-old
Mm-hmm.
and being a fully grown man in my early 50s at the time, I have done some work.
Mm-hmm.
I have healed a lot
Mm-hmm.
from what I did and did not get from him. So I wasn't holding anything against him.
Mm-hmm.
I had seen him when he was in the hospital. I happened to be in Vegas on vacation, and my brother called me and said, "Hey, where are you? I think you're here. You need to get over to the hospital because Daddy's da 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 da." And I was like, "Oh, okay." I wasn't interested in going to see him
Mm-hmm.
because there was no emotional connection,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was Deborah that said, "You need to go see him." Because Mika was just like, "I'm whatever you want
Yeah.
to do,"
Yeah.
and Deborah said, "Because it was the three of us were in Vegas." She said, "You need to go see him.
Mm-hmm.
Just go. You ain't gotta make yourself available or anything. Just go." So I went,
Mm-hmm.
and it was weird because I did not have any feelings one way or the other. It was like I was standing there with a stranger,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the first time I had seen him. Um, shoot, in decades.
Mm-hmm.
So so when he was dying, and I told Mika, Mika, I think I need to go. She said, "Yes, you do." And I said, "I don't want to go." She said, "Yep, and that's why you have to go.
Mm-hmm.
There's still more work
Mm-hmm.
for you to do." And it was oddly enough, I've been to Vegas 100 times.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first time I ever been to Vegas by myself.
Mm-hmm.
That was the weirdest thing in the world. Driving 3 hours, I'm like, man, this is weird. This is how this feels. Be by yourself, listening to music, and driving 3 hours, and it's like, man, this is strange. I mean, I've driven to San Diego by myself. I've never driven that far by myself. I was
Mm-hmm.
like, wow, okay. So when I got there, I was just praying, Lord, why? Why did you send me? And he was dying. He was
Mm-hmm.
at home, but he was dying.
Mm-hmm.
He was pretty much, on hospice to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
And I found myself, I had to tell him something that I had not told him.
Mm-hmm.
I told him, well, first I asked him, I said, I gotta ask, are you a God believer? Are you a Jesus man? And he said, yes. I said, okay. So well, then let me say this to you. For all that you did or didn't do, for all of the time that was either given away or stolen, none of that matters now.
Mm-hmm.
I said I didn't get to spend the kind of time that I should have been spending with you. I didn't get to have the relationship that I should have had with you on this side.
Mm-hmm.
However, now that I know who you believe in, we'll have an eternity to get
Mm-hmm.
it right.
Mm-hmm.
And that felt so good to say. And then
Mm-hmm.
for the rest of the day, and it was almost like a rinse
Mm-hmm.
came over him
Mm-hmm.
of cleansing. I could see it
Yeah.
in his. He was very sick, and I
Yeah.
could see it in his body language.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, "Thank you."
Mm-hmm.
And I was
Yeah.
like,
You released him.
"Yeah, that felt good." So
Mm-hmm.
for the rest of the time I was there, I served him. I
Maybe you
helped him to the
released him from his
bathroom.
generational curse.
Right. The curse was lifted. I am a curse lifter.
Yeah.
I found myself serving him
Mm-hmm.
willingly,
Mm-hmm.
helping him to the bathroom, helping get his food together, sitting talking and not feeling anything.
Mm-hmm.
Oddly enough, though, I still did not have an emotional connection with
Mm-hmm.
him.
Yeah. And
I
they.
served him like I have served
Mm-hmm.
hundreds of homeless
Mm-hmm.
people
Mm-hmm.
and people that I just seen that needed something because
Mm-hmm.
I love to serve.
But that's a blessing. And maybe God had that set up for you
Man,
so that it wouldn't be so devastating
Yeah.
to be there in that space, not having had that relationship, and
Right.
this is it,
Right.
so.
My siblings all had different, varying degrees
Mm-hmm.
of relationships with him, and my brother that was the closest to him, he really struggled.
Mm-hmm.
Even when he was sick and he called me and said, "Hey, he's in the hospital." He was, "I need you here." And when I got there, he hugged me and cried all over me, and then he left. This nigga left. I'm like, "What? You called me to come be with you, and you gone?"
Uh-huh.
He couldn't. He was like, "I
He,
can't handle it.
he
I can't
couldn't
see
do it.
him like
Yeah.
this." And but he had a journey with him
Right.
that I didn't have,
Yeah.
and it's
But you
funny.
were also healed too from much of what had happened, so that you could really just be there to serve him just like you would serve any man or woman who needed help.
Yeah, yeah. It was a surreal
Mm-hmm.
experience, and when he passed, because I don't have full contact with all of my siblings, but I know that all of them on social media. And so when he passed, I sent a group message to all of them and said, I'm sorry for the loss that you're experiencing, and I'm praying for you guys
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't have a loss,
Mm-hmm.
and they all had some type of connection to him.
Mm-hmm.
I was the only one that didn't,
Mm-hmm.
and I was the first, the
Mm-hmm.
oldest, outside of some mystery child that's supposed to be in Europe somewhere. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
watching the podcast and your last name is Knox, and you probably didn't put your name as Knox, but you had a father named Knox, and you were in Sweden, or you're in a Danish territory somewhere. Look me up, because if it's true, then you're my brother. But if it ain't, keep living your life. Because his stories didn't always line up with that.
Mm-hmm.
But when I said that to them, some of my siblings got offended
Mm-hmm.
because they thought I was taking a dig, and I
Mm-hmm.
was like, "No, you don't get it. I did not have what some of you had
Mm-hmm.
at all. He was a stranger to me.
Mm-hmm.
You all have had certain moments and things and dinners and stuff. I have never had any of that
Mm-hmm.
with him. Heck, when I went to see him before he got sick, we Mika went with me to see him, and this was actually the first time I had seen him since I was a child. And the impression that he left on her, when we got in that car, she said, "Ooh, yeah, it was better that he wasn't in your life.
Mm-hmm.
That's bad."
Mm-hmm.
And he was sick then, but we didn't know he was sick.
But he was still who he was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he all those years. So it was like,
Mm-hmm.
"Ooh, God."
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so it turned out to be a powerful thing, um, but I get it. In looking out for my children, I want to protect them. I want to protect them from the generational mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
I want to protect them from their own original mistakes. I realize I can't, but it's my goal to do
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah.
I think I'll die trying to do that.
That's what parents do.
Yeah, I get it. I get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I get it. So, Mom, this has been heavy. I actually thought I would cry at some point in this episode, but I'm glad I didn't, because most of the stuff we've talked about,
Mm-hmm.
I've already cried about it. Matter of fact, all of the stuff I've already cried about all that stuff, and I don't actually have any tears left for any of that. I
Mm-hmm.
have tears for other than I have tears for my children. I have tears for you. I have tears for my wife, but I don't have any tears for that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just been an interesting journey. This thing called life. Um, it's one of the reasons why I came with the name. Life interrupts us.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to be the rudest thing in existence.
Yeah.
Life. It's disruptive. It doesn't
Unwanted.
ask you,
Yeah.
"Do you mind if I?" It just
Mm-hmm.
does what it does, no
Mm-hmm.
matter what it is. You mentioned earlier that you had an $800, almost $900 water bill
Mm-hmm.
because your backyard, not your house, but your backyard flooded,
Mm-hmm.
or front yard. That's life interrupts us.
Yep.
And so I want to yield to you one last time as we're wrapping this up. If there's any nuggets or things that you want to share, or say to me, or
Mm-hmm.
just whatever,
Yeah.
and the folks that's out here listening and gleaning, hope they're gleaning,
Yes.
glean,
Yes.
glean.
Well, I first want to say to you how proud I am of you for your journey, and for your willingness to be transparent and to use your life to be a blessing to other people, because you're not an original. There are
No.
so many people that will watch this podcast that will say, "Oh my God, that's me."
Mm.
And so I want to just encourage you to know that this is a God thing. God has put in you the heart for people and really want people to heal and be whole. And that's how we are whole. That's how we escape going into generational curses, by clearing up these mistakes and correcting them and doing the work, the never ending work. I just want to say to all the viewers and listeners, when you find yourself in a place where you feel inundated with the things that have happened to you, that you have become a victim of, and then maybe even have become a perpetrator yourself because those things happen to you and you have continued making those mistakes. You don't have to stay there. Get the help you need. Sometimes we need a guide. Sometimes we need to sit down and get some counseling to help us to kind of heal from those things that happen so we can stop repeating it. You know, there's an old saying, if we don't stop and look back at our history, we are destined to repeat it. So go ahead and glance back at that history and look at where this stuff is coming from, and then make the decision that you're going to do something about it, that you're not going to continue to make the same mistakes. There's beauty in mistakes as long as you acknowledge the mistake. Because if you don't, you will keep making the same mistake. When you acknowledge it, you embrace it, you look at every area of it, and you do what you need to do to correct it. So, son, I am so proud of you, and thank you for having me on this podcast.
Pleasure
I know
was
it's going
ours.
to bless so many people.
Thanks, Mom. I couldn't have done it without you. I've been looking forward to uh, two particular episodes from the inception of this podcast, and that was 2 years ago.
Mm.
And you were one of the two. The other one was one of your colleagues who you mentored, and um, just so much has been unpacked with these conversations. Um, I'm excited about pushing this narrative that we can turn corners, that we can change,
Yeah.
that we can change things. And, the church in general has been a place where a lot of change has been preached, but not a lot of change has been reached.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's so many other things that are in the way of that. But in real life, with people who may not believe in God, people who
Mm-hmm.
have a different belief system, they follow a different religion or whatever. Um, One thing I know about all of us, all almost 8 billion of us,
Mm-hmm.
life interrupts us all.
Every one of us.
Every single person that's a mouth breather,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
life interrupts us.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited and very grateful that you came on. Um, I enjoy having these types of conversations with you, when we can unpack some things from yesterday
Mm-hmm.
and and be okay unpacking them.
Mm-hmm.
There was a time when I couldn't have had those conversations, and I want you to know
Mm-hmm.
that for you said that you felt like you should, part of you feels like you should have never let me go. I never ever ever felt like I needed to blame you for the experience that I had.
Mm-hmm.
I knew, and that's, see, that's the antidote for me, right? As I'm thinking about trying to protect my kids, there's some things that I know I cannot and should not protect them from,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and they have to
They
experience
have
some
to.
things,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm navigating with that. Even to this day, I'm navigating with that, and that's hard.
Mm-hmm.
That is, I guess for me, if this were an episode about parenting, I would say that is the hardest thing in life,
Yeah.
knowing when to let go and let them fall.
Right. And no matter how old they get.
Yeah, yeah, that's really tough.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's really really tough.
Mm-hmm.
So, I appreciate you for being here. Um, this is Life Interrupts Us. You have heard several stories. Um, my mom has been gracious enough to remember the things of yesteryear, that we've journeyed through together, and As life interrupted us then, it will continue to interrupt us. The question is not whether or not life will interrupt you. The question is, once life does
Mm,
interrupt you, what are you going to do about it?
yes.
I'm Stephen Wayne. I'm your storyteller. This is my lovely mother, Dr. G, Dr. Gloria, and I'm so excited that she was here today. Y'all be good. So you've come to the end of another episode of Life Interrupts Us, the podcast, and I hope that you've been thrilled by the storytelling. I hope that you gained some insight from some of the guests. I hope that you have come away putting more value on your own stories. But let's be clear, life interrupting us is not a random thing. Sometimes it's just the facts of life. Sometimes it's at the hands of someone else. Sometimes it's at the hands of ourselves. So, whatever you decide to do, just make sure that you focus on being a victor and not a victim. That you focus on being an overcomer. That you focus on being the winner and not the loser of this game called life. Start telling your stories. I'm going to keep telling mine. I'm Stephen Wayne, and I'm honored to be your storyteller. This is the podcast where life interrupts us. So here's the thing. If you don't play, life wins. So let's play. Take care of yourself.